can you hear? Oh, of course you can hear me because you responded to me. Right. Okay. Don't forget to send your attendance. How many people do we have now? 36. Okay. I think we'll just start. Okay. Because I probably need to cook in a while. All right. Share my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So today we will continue our lecture on to the next topic on category. Okay. So this will be the list of things you should learn by the end of this lecture. Be able to understand what categories are, how they make sense of our experience, and how information is related. Is everything okay?
Doctor, I think attendance have minor issue. Maybe it's just me. But yeah, I can submit attendance.
Cannot?
And not.
Okay. Hang on. Let me unshare my screen and let me check. Let's see. Is it for lecture, right? Okay, can you try again? And let me know if it works now.
Yeah, it works. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay. Right. Okay. So these are the things that we will learn. We'll learn about how information is actually being organized in our minds. Yeah. List of topics. Hopefully we can try to finish within an hour. Okay. So of course, what we see over here is a cat. So some of you probably own this as a pet. So what kind of characteristics can you associate with today's object? What can you say? What kind of
Furry.
features? Yeah, furry. Okay, what else?
Eating fish.
Yeah, eating fish. It eats fish. Yeah, of course, right? And
Or
also drinks.
legged.
Again?
Or leg.
For leg, yeah, okay. I probably have not seen any cat with more than 4 legs, right? Yeah, so probably scare us if you see that. So it's got fur. What else?
Moving fast.
Yeah, okay, so it moves really fast, so maybe it purrs, right? So these are some of the characteristics of cats. So like, it likes to rub to people. So for some of us who are very afraid of cats, the moment you see it coming to you, you'll be like screaming, right? I used to be that when I was small, but now probably got used to it. Some say that it's got 9 lives. Don't know whether or not you believe it. Maybe yes, maybe not. So it depends on what our beliefs is. It sleeps a lot. Do you agree? For those of you who have owned cats, maybe you can understand this. Garfield maybe is a good example. So these are basically just some of the features or characteristics that we can associate with this specific object, which is basically a cat. And this is basically just an example. There's a lot of other examples that we can think of. This is a bit of recap from what we have previously learned from last topic on mental representation. We learned about concepts, and we know that concept is the smallest unit of knowledge that we have or we use to keep the information or to expand our dictionary of knowledge. So we can have concepts of events, environment, objects, you name it, people. So it's basically a huge network of knowledge that we have. So again, whatever that we can think of, whether it's relating to all of these different aspects I mentioned, these are basically known as concept. Okay, and it is the most commonly studied function of concept is called categorization, and most often we understand that categorization happen to be in a hierarchical manner, as we will see later. So of course, when we think of categories, you can think of a lot of different categories. For example, for cars, we can think of different makes, like Mercedes, Proton, Chevrolet, Japanese cars, so on and so forth. But you can also think of vehicle as a form of categories. Then you have within it cars, maybe motorcycles, maybe bicycles, just different types of vehicles, right? Doesn't matter if you use petrol or not. So these are just a few different types of categories and concepts that we have looked into in previous chapters, and now we want to move on with these chapters and try to have a better understanding of why category is very useful for us. First of all, it helps us to understand individual cases. So assuming that, let's say you are now at a petrol station, so you see a lot of cars, you see people, you see at a petrol station, you can now maybe withdraw money because you have ATM machines. Well, actually, I'm talking about the common petrol stations we have in Malaysia. So probably in Japan, you may have different setting altogether. So there's so much of information or knowledge that you can gain about what a specific scenario or event or object you can get within the specific context, right? So this is basically something that enables us to understand the relationship of how these objects make between one another. So if you see, let's say, a furry animal trying to cross the street, can probably be either maybe a cat or a dog. Okay, dog furry, maybe yes, maybe no, depends on the type of dog, I think. So, but then if you see, it can also be, let's say, a bear, right? A bear is also considered furry, but we will all be all panicky and anxious if we see a bear crossing the street, because that's less common. But having this knowledge actually helps us to understand what is common and what is uncommon. So the next is to help us to make what we call inference. So inference is something that allows us to produce a conclusion, right? So things like, let's say we know that there is a disease, assuming now, right, there's this disease, the COVID disease is actually now hitting us hard again, again under MCO. Yeah, everybody is taking a deep breath again when we have to go through another MCO, and we know what it's like to be in this situation. Do you know whether or not you guys were out and around about yesterday? It was jam all around. I needed to return to my parent in-law's house, and it took us 2.5 hours because everybody probably already could estimate that, okay, because there's going to be an MCO today, so yesterday, that is the last day that you need to probably go and visit your parents or friends or go out for a meal with a friend, because you have restricted things that you can do starting today, right? So having that sort of knowledge, enables you to come up with some sort of conclusion that certain things will be prohibited for you to do, and that allows us to make what we call inference, right? So that is the reason why this knowledge about category is important. The next one is about understanding behavior. So assuming, let's say you are around a stadium, let's say, and you see a person with the left side of the face painted in red while the right side is painted white, and they're heading towards a football stadium. So if you see somebody doing that, and you know that, all right, that person is a Manchester United fan probably. So maybe it's a less common thing if you see people going to classes, or attending exams with this sort of behavior. So it does allow us to give some sort of understanding, of what we can find common and what is then considered strange. So if a person is painted in this sort of colors on their face goes to a stadium. If there is a football match, then that's not strange because it's very common, especially if you were to stay in the UK. Okay, so what we want to look at next is we look at categories. We have by now understood that these are the reasons why categories allows us to function rather well in our environment. What we want to look at next is why definitions don't quite work for categories. So we know that in order for us to understand something that belongs to a category, most of the time we will use some kind of definition, right? So okay, let's say for a geometrical object, we know that that object needs to have a plane of figure having 4 equal sides. Then you can say that, okay, this is a square. So then if you want to say, okay, what is a round? What is an ellipse, for example? So you already know that certain characteristics should be considered true, right? For that object to for a specific object to be considered certain for a certain set of features to be considered certain object, right? So this is what we normally do when we try to understand categories. However, it doesn't always work for natural things like birds, trees, or even human-made objects such as chairs or cars. So if I ask you to describe me a chair, tell me, what will you tell? Well, how would you describe that? How would you describe a chair? What features do you think a chair should have? Anyone?
A chair should have a leg and a place to lean on.
Yeah. So it's got legs, then it's got like maybe something that you can lean on, right? But we also have chairs, right? Like if you go to, let's say, mama mama stall, you have a chair, but you don't have a place that you lean on, right? So that is still considered, those plastic chairs. Of course, you do have plastic chairs where you can lean on, but also those, those kind of like stools, but those are still considered chairs, right? So that is again one of the difficulties that we have when we try to use definition for a specific category, because not all definitions is applicable for a specific category. So by definition, you can read that is what defines a chair, right? A piece of furniture consisting of seats, legs, back, often arms, designed to accommodate one person. But you also have a chair, like a sofa, that can accommodate up to 6 people, like the very large chairs, right? Large sofa. I'm sure you have one of those, and we like to sleep on those, right? It's very comfortable. So if we look at all of these, these are undeniably some example of chairs, right? But they can have a variation of features or characteristics that make them up as a chair. If you look at the last object over here, okay, you see these women sitting on this bedrock, right? And well, it is not exactly a chair, but we can, to some extent, say that, well, okay, we can treat this like a chair, not exactly a chair. So then the next question is, what is the actual definition of a chair, right? So that's why there's been a lot of debate about, what constitutes the definition of an object, right? So, and this is just one example, let alone other examples like furniture, cars, bicycles, you name it, right? And we can go on and on to debate about, these differences. So then there comes this theory about what we call family resemblance, because definitions don't always work. Okay, we all agree that we cannot use definitions for everything to fit all members of a specific category. Therefore, we need to have a different definition, a more loosely coupled definition of what constitutes a category. And for that, researchers came out with this idea of family resemblance. So the idea is, so long that an item has some sort of resemblance with another member of the same category, then we can say that, okay, they belong to the same species or same group, right, or category. So then you can say that, okay, we have chairs, they have like different sizes, different shapes, or different materials. So long that that they resembles one another, like a kitchen chair and a beanbag, then we can to some extent agree or assume that they still belong to this chair category. So there are two approaches to determining that categorization can be done based on some sort of similarity. One is what we call prototype, and one is exemplar. So let's now look at the similarity and difference between these two. So in terms of the similarity, we agree that it's got some sort of membership categorical standard, if you can put it that way. So that's one that you can use, and then there's like some kind of threshold that you can compare with this specific object as a standard to represent that specific category. So both of these is applicable at the level of prototype and exemplar, but they also hold some sort of differences. So in terms of prototype, in terms of identifying an item, whether or not an item belongs to a specific category, we do this thing called averaging or prototyping. So we'll look into that in a while. And as for exemplar, we kind of like consider something that belongs as a total, so long that a large majority of the category has certain characteristics, then we can consider that this is an example of this category. Otherwise, then this is a less similar or less known example to represent X category, right? So this is an example of an exemplar. Sorry. Okay, so now let's look at prototype. Okay, so right, so Roche actually did a lot of research in categories. So if you Google about him, there's a lot that you can find. And what he tries to find that, to what extent can we categorize an item based on prototype similarity. So if you look here, we have these different types of birds, right? You've got robin, sparrow, blue jay, and then all of these, based on this, you can come up with some kind of template or what we call a prototype of a bird. And in this prototype categorization similarity, for every kind of member of an item that belongs to a category, we can actually come up with a prototype, with a template. Okay, and if you look over here, a prototype doesn't necessarily have to look exactly like that specific object, but more like a representation. So it doesn't mean that both of these animals, like owl and penguins, they are considered under the same category, bird, right? But again, they have a different, maybe a different degree of similarity, and this is what's applicable in this prototype. Because if you look over here, you have a sparrow over here, so there's certain value to the degree of similarity using this prototype example. So sparrow may be here, owl may be here, penguin is here, and bat is probably here. So there's certain levels of a certain degree of similarity that we can assign between one object or one item with another member that belongs to the same category. So in this concept, this is definition that is further identified as an item that has high prototypicality, an item that has low prototypicality. So what that means is, for something that has a high prototypicality, the category actually closely resembles the category, the prototypical object of that category. For example, let's say this is a prototype of a bird. So if, let's say, any one of these animals has got a close resemblance, right? Closely resembles, then we say that it's got the item, or the member over here has got a high prototypicality degree, or membership with a prototype of, let's say, a bird in this category. But let's say if we have, let's say, a penguin or a bat or maybe an owl. So you see this degree, the values over here. So the further they are away from a prototype or prototypical item, then it means that it doesn't have a very close resemblance. So it doesn't have, like, it doesn't resemble the typical item or member of that category. So we can then safely say that bats, penguins, owl probably have a low prototypicality value compared to other standard birds, right? So this is based on this prototype example, right? And it does applies quite well, and it has been shown that prototypical objects seems to have a very high family resemblance. Okay, and this has actually been proven in one of the experiments conducted by Roche and researchers and other researchers. So what they did over here is they gave participants they asked participants to write down the characteristics of each of these items, such as chair, sofa, mirror, and telephone, and they asked them to list as many characteristics and attributes that they feel common across these objects, right? And such as, for example, bicycles, and these are the common things that that is applicable for an bicycle. So what then happens is they start to rate the degree of these characteristics, what appears to be closely related to one another. And it was found that chairs and sofa appears to share similar characteristics. And so in that sense, they deduce that they conclude that these objects appears to be more related, so therefore they have high prototypical or higher family resemblance compared to other objects such as mirror or telephone. Okay, so this one have like lesser overlap in terms of the features. So let's say if I ask you what are the features of telephones and maybe chair or sofa, maybe they're like far apart. But if I get you to list down the features of telephone, the standard maybe old telephone, and maybe your mobile phones, then maybe your mobile phone appears to be somewhere here, over here. So if you see here, there is some kind of degree that can, something like fuzzy logic, that you can identify between something that has a very good resemblance and very poor resemblance. Okay, so in that sense, you can actually avoid using definitions, because then you can have like some sort of degree on where certain elements should exist in on this scale. Right, so this think about identifying object that appears to have some kind of resemblance, right, can be identified using this technique called sentence verification technique. So what this experiment does is participants are supposed to identify if a statement should be considered a yes or a no. Okay, so for example, a participant can be asked whether an apple is a fruit, right, or a pomegranate is a fruit. So maybe it takes a longer time for them to respond that pomegranate is a fruit compared to if an apple is a fruit, right? And this has been shown in this experiment by Smith and co-workers, where RT represents reaction time, that the closer the resemblance is to what we understand or what is common to us, it has a high prototypical family resemblance, then the faster it is for us to respond compared to something that is less common. So, if you ask someone who is not, or maybe less familiar with the maybe fruit durian, if you ask if a durian is a fruit, it probably takes a while for us to respond, because that probably has it's less common. So this sentence verification technique is used a lot to estimate how far an object or an item's actually been represented in our minds, okay, as what we will see. But before that, we look at prototype, and again, exemplar, as what I have indicated earlier on, actually represents a kind of like a representation, a typical or atypical case of a specific member. Okay, so objects or animals such as penguins or ostrich, these are like, you know, less typical or less common to represent a bird. So in this exemplar, what we normally take is more like an average, right? So things like you need to know, you need to have a more cohesive, a more general understanding about an object to identify that whether or not an item is can be considered as an example of a case of an object. So like things, categories like games like football, computer games, golf, solitaire. So these are just some variation of games, although you can further represent them in other categories, but generally we can all be happy that all of these are just examples of games, right? Yeah, so this is basically just some ideas on exemplar. Right, so now let's move on to how information is commonly organized in our minds. Okay, so hierarchical organization, as indicated earlier on, has been one of the mainly studied I would say representation, and we use a lot based on this hierarchical representation that we have by now used or created a lot of algorithms that supports this theory. Okay, so again, Roche did this research to identify whether this is actually true, and it was found that items or categories appears to be represented in these levels called basic, if it's somewhere in the middle. So if you have chair, table, bed, then that's what we call a basic category. And if you move up, then the category is called superordinate, such as furniture or vehicle. And if you move down from basic, then you have this thing called subordinate. So this is basically going to a more detailed representation, and this is more general or generic representation of a higher level of this representation. So we're used to this sort of categorization, and so and this has been proven by Roche and his colleagues. So what they have done to really identify whether this is really the case is they ask people to list down the features for the following. So what are the features for furnitures, and then correspondingly what are the other features that one can think of if I ask you to list down you know, those characteristics that represents table and other features that represents kitchen table, right? So like So what it did was they got participants or people to identify, name me the features that you can think of that represents a furniture category, a chair category, and kitchen category, for example, or kitchen table in this case. And it was found that, let's say, if people were asked to list down these categories, let's start with these basic categories. Like if it's a table, people are able to produce like most common features if it is at a basic level, such as table over here. Like, you know, assuming that people can list down about 9 features, 9 characteristics that is associated with a table that can represent a table. And if people were asked to be a bit more specific, they only gain just a little bit more information, which is about 10. So let's say if they are able to list down 9 items here, if they were asked to be a bit more specific, they only managed to represent or produce just a little bit more information to be a bit more specific. Whereas if they were asked to be more generic, to go at the level of superordinate, let's say at furniture level, then the number of features became actually a lot less, okay, because they have to be a bit more general, right? So a furniture needs to be representing a chair, table, bed, cupboard, so on and so forth. So that's why you lose a lot of features as you become more generic, and you actually only gain a small amount of detail as you move from basic to subordinate. That's why in most cases the basic one or basic category allows us to be able to represent most items or most characteristics, right? So this is because the information we have is most psychologically privileged. That's what we put. The reason why we are able to recall most information at the level of basic compared to superordinate or subordinate, it's mainly because we have been most influenced by trying to produce items that belongs to the basic level compared to a superordinate or subordinate level, okay, as what we will see later. So yeah, I described about this. You can look into this later. So now, if I ask you to list down to me these objects, what would you say this object is? Anyone?
Guitar, fish, and pen.
Guitar, electric guitar.
How about this?
Fish.
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 Fish, yeah. And how about that?
Jeans or pants.
Trousers.
Pants, trousers, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Jeans, pants, trousers, depends on what our slang is, whether we are British or like American. Of course, trousers and pants actually refer to different things in different parts of the world. So let's just make it generic. So what you have indicated to me is something that you have identified at a basic level. So again, this supports the reason why some of this item is psychologically privileged, because we are so used to identifying items at a basic level rather than at superordinate or subordinate. Okay, so of course you can say like, oh, it's a rock guitar if you play, or if you go general, you can say it's a musical instrument. You can say this is an animal, but no, we say this is a fish. Or if you're a bit more specific, probably if I were to speak to someone who does marine biology, for example, or studies for fishery, maybe they know that this is a trout, a special type of salmon. Okay, and yeah, and somebody said this is jeans, so it could be that this is just a different type of names of pants, trousers, jeans, but we can also associate this with something more specific, which is maybe Levi's, which is specifically a brand, a type of jeans brand, right? So this is one of the reasons that supports this aspect, that why we are able to identify most items or most characteristics of features at the basic category, simply is because of this psychologically privileged items that we have at a basic level. Partly because it makes it easier for us to recall the information, and it gives some sort of economically privileged way of managing information in our but basically accessing this sort of information from our minds, right? So what we want to look at next is called semantic network. Okay, so again, it is based on this sort of findings that Ross and the team actually used to develop a computer model based on human memory. Okay, because we needed to understand how the human memory works. Initially, when we studied at the beginning of the semester, we look at the different components of our memory, but now in terms of how that information is actually being managed in those memory, this is basically done by the semantic network. And I think semantic network is being used a lot, as one of it is artificial neural network, ANN. It's been I think been derived from this sort of findings. So yeah, so we have a look at categories. We now know that information is being organized in a hierarchical manner. And because we know that we have different levels of hierarchies, subordinate, basic, and superordinate. Now we want to know that how exactly is that information being stored and managed. Okay, and this has actually been done based on this network called semantic network. Okay, so and it's been this is basically the very first semantic network that was introduced back in the 60s. Of course, it has evolved quite a bit from time to time, but still the fundamental theory is still very much applicable. So this is how the semantic network looks like to represent a specific, let's say, series of or category of animals or bird in this case. Right, so if you look over here, you have this node, and what you have over here is called so you have nodes over here and you have links here. So this is very much similar to in ANN. If you learn later or if you're learning now, it's composed of what we call you have nodes or maybe nucleus inside, and you also have this thing called dendrites, right? So if you can still recall biology, so you know what I'm talking about. So in our brains, we have like all these neurons that is connected using connected to one another using dendrites. These links. So it is based on that sort of understanding that this semantic network is generated. Okay, and at the level of nodes, you have the categories, and what branches out from there is basically a list of features, okay, or properties that is representing the category. So if you look over here, you've got animals, so we can say that generally probably all animal has skins. They can move around, they eat, they breathe, maybe they I wanted to say maybe they can run, but not all animals can run. I'm not sure if you can say that fish run, maybe that's not so applicable. So that's why for something that is more specific, then that will be put at a more general, at a more specific level, at a lower level. So this is your basic level, this is your superordinate level, this is your subordinate level. Okay, subordinate is more specific. So at the level of bird, you have, let's say, wings, can fly, has feathers, and canary can sing. Can a canary sing? Maybe, yeah. Maybe canary, it's a small yellow bird. And yeah, so that's why you have yellow over here. And you also have different types of birds, right? Ostrich, then you can branch this out to penguin, you have owl, you have different types, sparrow, different types of birds, right? So, and of course, the further down that you move, the more specific the category becomes, and the more specific your properties of your of the category you can have. So this is basically how the network has been designed by Collins and Coylan, which has been later used in computer models. Okay, and yeah, so we look into that, and what we want to look at now is how we retrieve the properties. Okay, so if, let's say, early on we asked if a canary is basically a bird, right? So what you have to do is you have to move down this, like here, is a canary as a bird, or if a canary is a canary an animal. So using this sort of network, the hypothesis is it takes less time to identify that a canary is a bird compared to if a canary is an animal. Okay, because you have to move 2 nodes to identify that a canary is an animal compared to identifying if a canary is a bird. So that's why identifying a canary is a bird is faster compared to if responding to the question a canary is an animal. Okay, this is what we will see later. And if you look all of this, you may question, how come I don't put all of this, let's say, has skins, move around, eat, breathe, because it is also applicable at this level, bird level, and also applicable at this canary level. So this is what we call cognitive economy, because some of the features is being put at a high level. All of these shared features is being put at a higher level, at the superordinate level, if they're all sort of like shared. So there is no need to replicate the same features at the level of, let's say, basic or subordinate, right? At a more general level, at a more specific level over here, when it can be shared. So that's why, even though canary has wings, can fly, but the features are actually being put at a higher level up, okay? And this is basically the understanding that we have based on several series of experiments that we'll look into in a while, because had it been put at every one of these levels, let's say you've put skins, move, eat and breathe at all of these levels, then what you're actually doing is you are overloading the capacity of your memory, okay? And your memory do not have that capacity. It needs to work in such a very efficient manner, right? So that's why if you read over here, you'll find that some of the features happen to be put at a very specific categories of the semantic network, simply because of this reason, cognitive economy, because you don't necessarily need to duplicate and overload your memory when it comes to recalling them, because otherwise then your recall will be inefficient and you're going to be using a lot of storage, and this is unnecessary. You're going to get we wouldn't be able to function, because we're now only talking about one aspect. You have so many different types of categories that we have in our minds, so many different types of networks. There's actually billions of networks which are like communicating with one another, and if each node is actually having the duplicates of all of these, then it's really unnecessary and it wouldn't allow us to function efficiently. Okay, so that's why if you see here, a canary is an animal. You need to kind of travel like 2 nodes away, and compared to a canary is a bird. So this was actually been done as an experiment, and people were asked to respond, okay, and their response time is being recorded just to see whether this aspect is actually true, okay. And yeah, and this is basically the findings. And if you see over here, a canary is a bird, and this is a response time. And of course, even though the response time is somewhat more or less the same, right? Not much difference, but we can tell that it takes lesser time, because this is the levels that needs to be traversed, like how many jumps that you need to make between the nodes, right? And the larger the jump is, the longer the time is. Of course, if you ask if a canary is a canary, of course, it's just a very quick response that you can get, it's such a no-brainer question. Why are you asking me? Because it is actually just responding at this level. So this is at a category level, but if you were to ask the same thing but at a feature or at a properties level over here, then you will find that if you were to replicate this experiment, you will find that people tend to respond longer if they were to ask about they were asked to respond about the properties compared to the category. So you can see that we respond faster if, let's say, the question is about categories compared to if it is about properties, because yes, it does make sense that properties appears to happen at different levels, and it takes a bit of processing to identify whether a statement is true at a property level. So that's why if you look over here, the response time for those property questions appears to be longer compared to these category questions. Okay, so of course, if a canary can sing, again, even though it is basically at 2 different levels, one is property, one is category, we can safely say that the trend can more or less be generally it's more or less the same. So if you say if you ask whether or not a canary can sing, given that the person knows what a canary is and can associate it with a bird that can sing, then of course the response is a lot faster compared to if you were to ask if canary has skins, because this is already at a higher level, which is here, okay, at an animal level. So of course they need to traverse further up, and based on these findings that this network is being confirmed or verified that yes, it is likely that it's likely true. It's probably, you know, maybe about 90%, 80%, 90% true that we don't actually keep all of these features repetitively at each node level. So if you learn about deep learning, if you learn about LSTM, just different variations of deep learning algorithms, you will find that those nodes needs to work in an efficient way as much as possible, and this is actually applicable. Right, okay, so that is that, and this is probably the last slides, I think. Right, so this is basically on the category size effect. So not just trying to identify whether a canary is a bird or canary can sing. Well, even if you were to apply that at a higher hierarchy, at a higher level, larger categories, so it does appear, it appears to also follow the same pattern and principle that identifying whether an animal is a bird is an animal. Animal category includes birds and other concepts you see over here. So you have animals, bird, fish, mammals, and so on. So it does take a little bit more time to identify other categories if they have to travel up at a higher level. So if you look here, canary is further removed from the larger category over here, so superordinate. Animal, larger category animal, then it is from a smaller category bird. So this category size does have an impact because it is still using the same premise that if you are asked to verify, let's say, a salmon or a pig is a mammal or a pig is an animal, it will take equally long for you to identify this, to verify this statement, compared to if you ask, let's say a pig is a mammal, right? So this brings down to the effect of the category itself. The larger your category is, the longer it takes for you to identify that. Let's say if you have bird, fish, mammal, you have elephant, you have ostrich, you have penguin, you have, of course, the network will become larger and larger, right? And of course, just like how we understand things. Let's say you have a storage capacity and it's already full, right? And the let's say if your storage, your hard disk capacity is already full, access to a specific file can take a very long time, compared to, let's say, you have just purchased a new laptop and you only have one file saved in that hard disk. So of course, in that sense, then it takes a little bit faster time for you to access that, because that's assuming that you only have this aspect already only stored in the category. Okay, so yeah, so that ends our lecture for today. So I will I will expand your tutorial and post those tutorials hopefully by tomorrow. Until then, any questions from anyone about today's lecture or anything that you have?
So exceptions are included in the, what's it called, subordinate category, subordinate node, right?
Yeah, subordinate. Yeah. You mean this level, the canary level?
Yeah, because like from this example, bird can fly, and suddenly when you go to ostrich where it can't fly, so exceptions
right.
go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exceptions, of course. Yeah, that's another thing that I missed to say. Yeah, so for some of the items, even though, like, you have ostrich, you have, let's say, penguin, right? Ostrich, penguins, they cannot fly, right? Yeah, penguins don't fly, right? They're so heavy to fly, right? Yeah. So basically, yeah, exceptions. So what happens is, whenever there is a feature that doesn't correspond to the general category, then you're gonna have to input then at a lower level, which is a subordinate level, the item can be overridden. It's just like the concept of what you have, override. What is it? Your OOP concept, right? What is it? You have inheritance concept. Yeah. So you have inheritance. So whenever you have like a child class can always override a parent's features, right? Whether it's a method or if it's a variable. So it's the same concept over here. So even though generally a bird can fly, but whenever you have like another subordinate category that cannot fly, then that feature needs to be put at that specific subordinate level. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That's true. Any other question? No?
Guess
No?
not for now.
Yeah, right, great.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Okay, so I think again today's lecture is again quite straightforward. So right, okay, so I will post your questions later. So until then, I will see you guys during tutorial next week. All right.
Do we have tutorial next week? Wait, we do.
Do we have tutorial next week? Hang on. Yeah. Tutorial next week. Yes, we will have tutorial next week because next week is we're still not yet on holiday, right? Oh, hang on. Are you on midterm break next week?
Midterm break is next 2 weeks, I think.
It's the following week
Next
after.
So midterm break is 17 to 21.
Yeah.
So hang on. Are we in week 9? Or are we
Yeah.
week 8? I've lost my calendar. I'm very sorry. I'm all mixed up.
Week 9.
Week 9. Okay, so next week is Hari Raya is next week on 13, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So we should still you should still have class, right? On 10,
Yeah.
11.
Oh yeah,
12?
tutorial. We have tutorial, but not lecture. Okay, now.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Even I don't want to have lecture next week. Yeah. I won't let this, even though we're not allowed to go anywhere, but at least, just yeah, because it's still it's Hari Raya next week. So we won't have a lecture next week. We will have a tutorial. Okay. Yeah. Just tutorial for next week, and then the following week is your midterm, right? Okay. So we'll manage. Yeah, we'll see. If I cannot, I think probably we have very few topics left. Maybe 3 or 4. We'll see.
There's a question in chat.
Yeah. What is it? Right. Okay. So you were responding. Sorry, because I couldn't see this when my phone is somewhere charging. Let's see what you say. Why I take more time to recognize a whale as mammal than whale as animal? Why you take more time? Is it just you, or is it whale as mammal? Many factors actually. Whale as mammal, whale as animal. So a whale is, let's see. So a whale will be, where are we? It should be at a subordinate level, right? So according to the what is it? According to this theory, you will take a longer time to identify that a whale is an animal compared to a whale is a fish, correct? Or a whale is
a mammal.
Sorry, a whale is mammal. Sorry, whale is not considered a fish, is it?
I think that might be the reason why it's just a possibility, because even though whales are mammals, we easily assume them as fish because they live underwater.
Absolutely, yeah. I think because there might be some kind of like what is it? Exceptions. Yeah, some of it can get some confusion that we have, like some things are ambiguous, right? So this is basically some of the a model that was introduced back in the 60s, was it 70s, early 70s, one of the earliest models. So we're actually learning what is the fundamental over here. So over time, of course, that gets what is it, improve, or so improve. So that's right, refine, that's right, that's a word. So Yeah, so that is a very interesting question thing. You might want, we'll probably include that as one of the tutorial question and see, if we were to do this with people, right, other people apart from us, is this, what is it, hypothesis actually true, whether or not it takes longer time for us to identify a whale as mammals in comparison to whale as fish. So and then whale as animal. So if we were to follow this kind of hypothesis, then it'll take a shorter time for us to identify that a whale is an animal. But if it is otherwise, then it may well be that this confusion actually comes in, that maybe a whale is actually branching out from here. Now, this is again, there's no right and wrong, because we develop our knowledge based on what we know, based on our experience, based on the concepts that we learn since we are young. So there's no right and wrong, because there's no, again, right and wrong way in terms of how the network, the neurons in our brain connects to a different neuron. So that's why we have differences. But again, this is interesting to be tested later. So I'll probably include this as one of the tutorial questions later. So yeah, so this, we will probably have to revisit your question later when we discuss about the tutorial to see whether or not this is true. A lot of people is more consistent with you, or maybe there is an exception to this. Okay, yeah, so we'll do that later. Yeah, all right. Any more questions? No? Okay. If there's no more question, then selamat berbuka to all the Muslims. I should then see you guys on Tuesday next week. Okay?
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.